Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic, the podcast that breaks down the incentives that guide the decisions we make to understand who benefits from the status quo and what's at stake for the future. I'm Matt Haller.
And I'm Chris Michaud.
On this week's episode, we'll be diving into the incentives behind digital convenience. It seems as though every company has an app these days, but what are the implications of this digitization on the customer experience, the brands themselves, and society as a whole? But first, Chris, help us understand how we arrived in this place.
Absolutely, Matt. So if you think about convenience going back to the analog era, we can go all the way back to the late 19th century with the idea of canning things. So prior to this, you had to grow and consume most of your food where it was made. So by introducing things like instant coffee, tinned sardines, etc., you actually created an ability to survive and sustain life outside of growing seasons. If you fast forward a bit to most of the earliest 20th century was all about machines and making life convenient for us. So refrigeration, the car, dishwashing machines, washing machines, all that kind of stuff was meant to be convenient in the sense that these machines were our mechanical task robots. So we would be able to free up and have lots of leisure time. After the Second World War, you really focused on, this was kind of the golden era of, I'll call it time convenience, where we had a shift to frozen foods, drive-thrus, instant meals, fast food, all that stuff really came to play. The Swanson TV dinner was introduced in 1954. So imagine Thanksgiving dinner in a box. And the idea being that you were able to shift some roles, and especially with women entering the workforce, the idea you could maintain some of your lifestyle that you were used to, home cooking and being able to go do all these things while at the same time not requiring the labor intensity that it needed. In the sense that what we'll talk about with most of the things related to the podcast today is around the digital convenience aspect. And that began in the early 2000s when brands really began to dip their toes into the digital realm. So basic websites, email newsletters, experimenting with some of those things. Online shopping really began with not only Amazon, but eBay paving the way. But these interactions were largely transactional. So lacking that personalization and interactivity. So I went there, I knew what I was looking for, I bought it. Social media has helped change that a little bit because now you're able to build communities and foster sort of brand loyalty. So Facebook, Twitter, and later Instagram became hubs for that interaction. So thinking of brand influencers and that sort of thing. We can engage in customers in real time. Starbucks did this fairly early on by utilizing some social media contests and really generated content from users to help deepen those connections. With data analytics is really where personalization took off. So thinking about brands that leverage the data they know about their customers to deliver those tailored recommendations and promotions to enhance user engagement and satisfaction. So Uber Eats, DoorDash really exemplify this. A couple examples, giving you personalized recommendations based on what you've ordered in the past. So if I like sushi, it's going to continue to recommend sushi. So really revolutionary sort of those types of experiences. Now layer in AI in the last few years, and this type of tools allowed for voice technology into brand customer interactions. So like chatbots, virtual assistants, that sort of thing, giving you an instant support and experience, but also streamlining customer service operations. So that whole concept between a digital experience, we've talked about post 2000, but also that pre-digital physical experience, those lines are becoming much more blurred. So in a way, digital experiences and apps have really brought forth a myriad of conveniences for consumers, for no doubt being able to shop in one's home. You can order food with a few taps on the smartphone. So these definitely have simplified everyday tasks and enriched lives in ways we didn't think possible. However, I think as we'll talk about a little bit today as well, they've also raised some concerns around privacy, security of my data, employment concerns around the folks that help deliver some of these things, as well as the erosion of the traditional social interactions in restaurants and customer service agents and all the things that we've been used to in the past.
So it sounds like if we were to trace back some of the themes over the last 100 years or so, convenience has always been about getting time back, whether that was, I know that I was spending a lot of time in the kitchen, so now we're going to move to frozen foods, Pop-Tarts, easier breakfast, things that are going to give me a little bit more time back in my day. The next iteration of that is some of these digital apps that say, I'm going to even further make things more convenient by removing your need to do something, by creating call it the appification of everything. You want to get your laundry done, you want to get your food delivered, you want to check into a hotel. Everything is now more convenient. What are the implications of that on the businesses, the brands, and the social interactions?
Yeah. So if you think about an example of an industry that learned this early and failed and then corrected and got better at it was banking. So if you go back to the 90s, banking was very much on the edge of trying to use digital interaction, but in a way that disconnected with the customer. So don't come visit me in the bank and deposit a check because I will charge you a fee for it. Chase did that and got huge backlash for it. On the other hand, Chase learned that lesson and said, okay, how can I connect with the customer in a digital way that makes sense? So now if I get a check, I don't have to go to the bank anymore. I can take a picture of my camera. It's deposited. And in some ways, I would argue that's a much more enhanced value. And I feel more connected to the bank because I can do that. I can Zelle money. So integrating all of that type of stuff. So I think that's a good example of learning it the hard way, but then also correcting and making sure that it's more convenient in a positive experience.
digital apps are great for scale, but they're good for those companies that are a large bank, a Bank of America, for example, where they're going to drive a lot of ROI because I'm able to remove that interaction, that person from the equation. At the same time, though, if I'm a customer, most customer interactions are between person to person. There needs to be some kind of a trust. So by investing so heavily in these apps and in a digital experience, are we limiting the ways that employees, that companies can interact with their customers? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
So I would say it's probably both. So think about an experience that would have been, if it still existed, would be a bad thing. I'm at the airport and my flight gets canceled. 20 years ago, I would have had to have gone wait in a very long line, hoping to get rebooked, may not have gotten rebooked, and probably would have maybe missed a connection. Versus in the app, it literally says, here are the flights that are available that I can book you on right now. One might be leaving in 30 minutes. I could literally do it and walk to the other end of the terminal and get on a flight. So I think it depends on what the circumstance is, but I would say that for the most part, the convenience factors that, yes, those digital investments and more companies that can get scale out of it. I don't think having a digital app for my landscaper is probably a great idea, right? But having a digital app that might say, okay, I can reroute the delivery of a package because now I have a doctor's appointment. Like those types of things, I think you're going to see more and more of. And if smart organizations use AI, machine learning, all that type of stuff to enhance those experiences, I think they will create more customer loyalty than they might have just creating the process aspect of it.
Well, lucky for us, we don't have to pontificate on this alone. We've got a couple of guests that are going to help us unpack this. When we're back, we're going to be chatting with someone who's built digital experiences for companies like Uber, Hilton, PepsiCo, and more. You won't want to miss it. Stay with us. Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Our first guest is Michael Offerman, the Senior Director of Strategy at Cactus, a company that builds user experiences for ambitious clients. Throughout his career, Michael has built user experiences for companies like Uber, Hilton, PepsiCo, Target, and Chobani, meaning he's a great fit for our conversation surrounding convenience. Thanks for stopping by, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
So this episode is all about digital convenience and the costs that come with it. But before we get into that, as a millennial and remembering those analog days when you had to pick up the phone and call someone, what do you think is the biggest digital convenience that we now have?
There's so many. There's one that's like really close to my heart recently is Partyful, which is this app where you can create a whole party and it's taken what was in the Facebook events functionality that's gotten lost and bogged down with Facebook losing its product market focus. It's really focused, but it's also made digital the act of texting or calling your friends to form a party. And I think that's a really interesting and had explosive growth. Another really interesting one is booking.com. I think that they've done a beautiful job of integrating a full comprehensive trip planning in a way that feels more thoughtful than some of their other third-party travel sites. And they're taking the role of a concierge almost, or travel agent. They have a new AI-based travel booking component where you can ask, hey, I want a house for a month in New Orleans around Mardi Gras next year, and I want to spend less than $5,000. It's pretty magical. And it's, I think, level of comprehensive travel booking that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned booking.com because I actually used it when I went to New Zealand back in January. If you've ever been there, like there's not a whole lot of chain hotels and stuff, right? So you have to be clever. And booking.com did a great job of not only amalgamating that, but like I had booked with some of their sub brands and they still recognized it and brought it all together. And basically I had my entire itinerary for the week and a half I was going around New Zealand, which was pretty cool and totally unexpected.
I'm using it as well to book for a trip for Japan. And similarly, it is able to translate and talk to these little ryokan owners, and I'm able to book every element of this. And I think it's really changing the way people travel too. It's maybe a little bit of a diversion, but we did some research with Hilton on how Gen Z and millennials travel differently and really focused less on just the fact that their age and income is different than the older generations, but really what is this cultural changes to their travel behavior. And one of the biggest ones was the fact that you can now have convenience when you travel at every dimension of travel, from booking every hotel, every activity. You'll never be lost anymore. And it's changed the way that people travel. It's interesting.
You've kind of hit on some of the things that we've seen that have changed more recently, but what's the biggest change just from all the brands you've dealt with that you've seen in terms of the realm of digital convenience?
I think there's two big changes that I've seen. One is thinking about convenience elements brought to a brand as not just ways to make it an easier experience, but build the brand itself. One of the projects we worked on was for Uber, where we helped come up with a strategy and thinking around some of the comfort controls that were released a few years ago when you book a Uber Comfort Comfort or Uber Black, you can say, I want it to be hot or cold, whether you want quiet conversation or no conversation with your driver, you can pay for extra time. And these were like a premium feature that we were creating for the Uber brand, which reinforced their entire positioning around having the world kind of revolve around you. You can summon a car whenever you want. You can have the type of experience that you want. And it was not just additional features for the sake of features. They were very thoughtful conveniences that shaped the brand perception. There's a lot of other great examples when it comes to things like the hospitality world. With Hilton, we worked on ways to tailor some of their digital conveniences across their portfolio. You know, they own Hampton Inn and Waldorf Astoria. And how do we tailor what some of the conveniences are for a traveler who's in a Hampton Inn for a few nights and they just want free breakfast versus the high level of a service that you'd expect at Waldorf Astoria, where you want to be able to book your massage in the app, or you have digital tools for the staff so that they can get to know the customer over a longer period of time, which you see in a lot more luxury resorts.
There's no secret that technology plays a huge role in bringing these conveniences to life because it allows these brands to create a personalized digital experience at scale in a way that previously you'd have to rely on an individual and train people. So from your perspective, what's in it for the brands? What's the incentive to invest in this world? But what also do we lose from a personalization perspective? And what do you think is at risk there from a brand perspective as well?
This is a constant conversation we have with a lot of our brands that have physical and personal user experiences or customer experiences and a digital interface. The hospitality category is a perfect example of this. Hilton Honors, you have a digital key in your app and you have automatic selection of when you get upgraded throughout the year if you're a certain loyalty level. That has standardized the experience, right? And you're not going to have a bad interaction at a front desk with a staff member. It puts the user more in control, which a lot of people love. But at the same time, you've now lost this moment where you have a user and personal connection between the guest and the staff member that are the moments that build the brand, right? Now, if I check in at the Hilton, I've gone straight to my room and I know I already got upgraded because I selected it. I never talked to anyone. And now I just am in another room. And those are the special brand building moments. And so I think that's this interesting tension that these brands are facing. I think that the human connection is one of the most important elements of building a brand experience, even though it may not be the most easy to deploy from a convenience and training perspective.
What are some brands you've seen do that really well, where they're able to use a digital experience to make their people create more personalized experiences? What's an example, if you know of any, that are able to capitalize on what was the deficit of the convenience market?
In the travel and hospitality world, there are a couple that come to mind. Aman Resorts, very luxury. They equip their staff with software behind the scenes that a user never sees, but they are taking notes on how their guests like to travel, who they travel with, what their pillow preference is, what they expect at breakfast. And then as they travel from resort to resort, their staff is deployed with all this extra information that helps create this ultra kind of personalized and convenient travel experience. At maybe a less luxurious level is Delta, which their on-flight digital app helps their flight attendants respond to delays and guide travelers to the right gate when their flight lands, thank medallion members and provide them with special service because they know who is a Diamond or Delta 360 member. So they've done a really good job of making their staff experience guided by a digital interface behind the scenes. Kind of enhances that personnel experience.
If you think about these trends and where this industry is going for the next 5 years, what do you think the future looks like? And what role do you think AI is going to play in that and the impact that it might have on people's jobs and the kinds of jobs that people will be having?
You're going to see a lot more of convenience baked into access to different tiers of service. In part, that will help streamline the whole experience, but I also think that it's going to become a bit more of a pay-for-play definition of convenience. Like Target recently created this Target Circle, right, which is their rewards program. They've rebranded it. They have buried their shipped delivery service into that. But now you have your standard rewards, Target Circle, or you can have a Target credit card, or you can have Target Circle 360, and now you're paying for same-day delivery. And then that convenience is kind of tiered in the same way that you see with loyalty programs for airlines, right? The more you have Delta Diamond, now they'll pick you up at your flight and drive you to the next connecting flight in a Mercedes or whatever. I think similarly, you're going to see these kind of pay for play tiers of convenience. As it pertains to AI, I think that a lot of these companies are rushing to pull it into their experience in a way that doesn't feel very unique. I'm seeing a lot of generic deployments of ChatGPT skinned within a chatbot. I mentioned Booking.com. I think that's one of the most successful applications I've seen, but I've seen others like LinkedIn now as a chatbot that will summarize your LinkedIn page, and it just feels stuck on. I think that it will struggle to be a brand builder for a while. I think that consumers are still not seeing the convenience from working with a chatbot or AI that you'd have talking to someone, or that you'd have from a really well thoughtful user interface that just does what you're hoping for it to do. So I think AI's got a ways to go. I think there'll be moments where it can be well deployed, but the real convenience is going to come down to a well-built app and a really thoughtful way AI can support people behind the scenes, because I think that's where brands are built in those staff interactions.
That's a really great place for us to wrap. Thank you, Michael, for stopping by and sharing some of your opinions. Coming up, we're chatting with someone whose company is disrupting the world of app delivery. Stay with us.
Hey B2B sales pros, want to maximize your team's performance? Discover Compose Comp, your key to optimize sales incentives. We blend expertise and technology to give your reps the edge they need to close deals. Don't settle for ordinary. Visit composecomp.com and unlock your team's full potential today.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. Our second guest is Mike Perhats, the co-founder of Nosh Delivery, a company that seeks to make food delivery economically sustainable for independent restaurants. Welcome to Fuzzy Logic, Michael.
Thank you very much.
This episode is all about how the digitization of the customer experience impacts the power dynamic in the business and consumer transaction. It sounds like the rise of app delivery is situated within a social movement that includes people working more than they ever have, meaning there's nobody home to start making dinner at 4:30. So this digital convenience gives a lot of people time back and promises a new revenue stream for restaurants. Seems like a win for everyone. But Mike, how does that actually play out in reality for restaurants? Are there certain restaurants that do better on these kinds of delivery apps than others?
There are certainly some restaurants that do much better than other restaurants. And the cost of convenience, I would say, is typically not exactly how it looks from the outside looking in. So as a consumer, we all know the delivery apps is really this convenient service that if you don't want to cook or you're too busy, you can press a few buttons and that food will show up at your door. It's this magical experience, one that we've all come to know and love. And I think that restaurants have a very different relationship with these delivery applications. And this is really the problem that we aim to solve at Nosh, is that typically some of the larger restaurant brands, they have these sweetheart contracts because they are big brands that these third-party delivery marketplaces want to show up on their products. And they don't pay very much commissions to these platforms, if any at all. And those sweetheart contracts are typically funded on the backs of the mom and pop restaurants across these local communities all over the world. And the commission that they charge is intended to be exactly the margin of the supply side of the network, because that is how these platforms make money, is to take as much as they possibly can for work that they do not have to perform. And so there's this very conflicting relationship that a lot of restaurants have. They say, wait a second, we can provide the delivery service. Why do we have to rely on this third party that's charging 30 to upwards of 40% of the food cost of what the customer is buying? That's my customer, right? And these platforms very much view it as their customer. The cost of convenience really lands with the restaurants. They pay for this in a big way. And it's not a beautiful relationship or sunshine and butterflies behind the scenes with these applications.
This makes me think of our previous episode about healthcare, where one of our takeaways was that there's an incentive to be big because of the immense power you get at the negotiating table. It sounds like this situation is similar. The larger you are, the smaller the margins you may have to pay. How does that trickle down to impact the front lines and the relationship between the delivery driver and the restaurant?
Delivery drivers in a traditional Chinese delivery or pizza delivery context were employees of the restaurants. And now they are short-term gig workers who are paid the absolute minimum that they could be paid, and they're largely viewed as a commodity that could be replaced by anybody that has the capacity to drive, which is just about most of the population. And so drivers, I think, have a very sour relationship with these products, but someone will always drive for a low price. And these drivers individually don't really have bargaining power to come together and work on any alternative. We're actually trying to solve this exact problem with technology to make it easier for people to work together in local communities to own more of the economic upside of the work that they do instead of transferring it to these third-party services. So drivers and restaurants alike, I think, sacrifice a lot to be on these platforms. They view these platforms as a necessary evil in a lot of ways, and the customers, I think, get a delightful service in return.
So, Mike, I totally see that not every restaurant is built for delivery, while others are built on the premise that volume is key. So adding a second revenue channel with delivery can be really valuable. But looking to the future, where do you think the app delivery industry will go?
There's a ton of people and a lot of money working on different problems in this space. So there's everything from underground tube delivery for food to drone delivery in more rural areas to robotic delivery. These are some of the more physical infrastructure phenomenon that are coming to life. And then I'll answer it personally as well, which is how we're thinking about these problems. And we think that there's a generational opportunity to redefine the way that networks work for local economies. And we're building a decentralized protocol network that would allow for a peer-to-peer network to engage in these delivery transactions without the need to go through Uber or DoorDash. And there's this massive problem with the way that every marketplace business is structured. And marketplaces represent some of the largest companies of the last decade in Silicon Valley. This is Airbnb, this is DoorDash. Some of the biggest companies work really hard in the early days to provide this very high value service, and they subsidize the cost of operating that service by raising tremendous amounts of money in venture capital. They go into these local markets, they promise these extremely low fees. We're going to provide this awesome service. Everybody's singing Kumbaya. This is great. And then they reach scale and they say, now you're going to pay triple what we were originally charging you for this service. And so marketplaces have this inevitable conflict between the intentions and needs of the shareholders who subsidize that early growth and the shareholders who now rely on this service, in some cases in the restaurant industry, for the survival of their business and the survival of their family in a lot of cases. And some mom and pop restaurants get just absolutely crushed by these services because the fees are so high. And so we think the next generational opportunity in Silicon Valley is to rebuild networks to better serve the edges of them instead of having most of the value accrued to the central intermediary. And that represents both an opportunity for brand new types of delivery networks to emerge, delivering other things, this permissionless, open, interoperable ecosystem of new emergent applications building on this shared infrastructure network that we're designing. There's things both in software like peer-to-peer networks and then things like robotic delivery. And I think both are very interesting potential futures.
You make a really good point, especially if we think about what a marketplace is supposed to do and the idea that it's self-governing because the market controls its own dynamics. When the marketplace is governed by somebody else and that somebody else also has shareholders and a business to run, the incentives might look a little different, both in the short term and the long term. Mike, thank you so much for stopping by. This conversation was really insightful.
Don't go anywhere. Matt and I will be back making our predictions for the future in 20 seconds.
Calling all B2B sales executives. Ready to elevate your sales game? Meet Compose Comp, your partner in sales incentive excellence. Our tailored solutions blend expert design with tech innovation, ensuring your reps have the confidence to close deals. Take the first step to sales success. Visit composecomp.com and schedule your consultation now.
Welcome back to Fuzzy Logic. It's time for some predictions. Chris, am I going to have an app for every brand in the world on my phone in the future?
You don't already? I'm kind of surprised. Joking aside, though, I do think, yes, there is a proliferation of convenience, especially digitally, that's going to continue to happen. But as our guest pointed out, some of these things, they're not just being created out of thin air. They're created to meet demand. So I think as you continue to see where people see the demand, see the need, and want that type of convenience, I could see you having still a plethora of apps on your phone, but fewer of them and of probably better quality, more nuance to the things that matter to you.
I remember Michael Offerman, our first guest, talking about how companies that do this really well are fusing a digital experience with a personalized one. He talked about building an app for Marriott where you'd be able to introduce somebody to a guest, right? And that way the guest's preferences, their name, and that creates just a little bit more loyalty and consistency from property to property. That's a great use case for an app. We also saw on the other hand that just because there is a service that you could build an app around or an experience around, like in the case of food delivery, doesn't always mean that it's going to be a good business and a good business for all customers too.
Yeah, I think the segmentation will become very important and the scalability. So a Pizza Hut or a Delta Airlines will have the need to create convenient things that drive scale and connectivity to customers versus I think what you'll find is maybe, let's say restaurants, since you picked as an example, a mom and pop restaurant or a local restaurant that wants that experience may find that the digital app is a detriment to that experience and may instead think of something different to help connect customers. So the convenience might be that app, instead of it being something like an order off of, it might be instead keep me connected through offers and interesting dining experiences that I otherwise would not have been aware of unless I was actively perusing their website, something like that.
I think that society is a pendulum. Things are going to swing one way or another. I think we swung pretty hard in the direction of digital apps. And I think you're absolutely right that for big brands and big companies that need to drive scale and efficiency, digital is a great way to go. But that also means that the way that you beat digital as a small mom and pop shop is by going hard in on personal relationships and going more analog. Because taking that approach, I mean, it's not going to make you as big as a Delta Airlines. I wouldn't probably recommend that for an airline in general. But if you're a restaurant, you are going to build a better following in your local market by delivering a quality product and knowing your customers, going back to those basics. And you can actually have a competitive advantage there compared to some of those larger companies that might be having a digital edge.
If you talk about, let's say, large companies that were, I think they've done this badly. So you mentioned airlines, right? So again, personal experience, but anyone else who did it. So United really pushed hard on the digital technology aspect. So I show up to the airport, I spent $4,000 on a business class ticket and I'm supposed to tag my own bag. Absolutely not. I'm going to hand this back to you. You're going to check it and you're going to move it somewhere else. So I think there are ways that, again, when you think about segmentation, so a mom and pop restaurant, maybe a late night menu they want a digital experience for, right? I just want you to come in, you're probably half inebriated, come get your food and get out of my restaurant, right? If I'm serving fine French cuisine, I'm probably not going to have a take home escargot in a box, right? So I think there's, again, the balances have to figure themselves out, but I do think that app development, at least the scalability of it, will allow to create some more of those nuanced experiences if you want digital at a much cheaper and much more faster speed to market than would have happened in the past.
One of the things that we haven't spoken about yet is how the lowering of the cost to build apps can lead to a proliferation of more applications and how that actually may have a backlash effect in the market where you might actually say, you know, if I have too many apps, then they're meaningless. Don't know if we're there yet, but that definitely feels like it could be a risk if the market continues in the direction that it is.
When we go back on loyalty, if there's a loyalty program for everything and I need an app for everything, it becomes something that gets hidden on my phone that I never use. So making sure you're not on the fourth page of your iPhone or Android device is probably something most app developers want to make sure it doesn't happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, if you're loyal to everything, then you're loyal to nothing. But on that note, I think it's a good time for us to wrap up and have you read us out, Chris.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Fuzzy Logic. Fuzzy Logic is produced by Mitch Miller. Tune in next week for our season finale on Community. We'll see you next week.